Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangwesom. As the tides sweep the global blocks there, we talk about NATO, we talk about BRICS, but also we talk about ECOWAS, and we come closer to home to the EAC. We see Kenya, we see Rwanda, we see an election that has just been done. But the biggest question is, how does this impact East Africa? How does it impact the region? But also, with this impact and influence, how far can it go? That's the discussion tonight. We'll take a deep dive into Kenya and Rwanda, but also relate the East African community to what is happening in ECOWAS. But the bigger conversation is what is at play in the region of Africa. Tonight, I have a panel that has experts in this area to put perspective to this discussion. But before I introduce the panel, you can be part of the show. Go to our YouTube channel, drop your comment there, let us know what you think, or our X platform, hashtag UBC Behind the Headline, let us know what you think, or the number 0709 60 25 92. Both as a text and a WhatsApp line there. Let me get to the panel that is going to put perspective to this discussion. On my extreme left, Honorable Captain Edward Francis Babu, a senior citizen in this country. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for calling me for this conversation. An interesting one, for that matter. And I welcome my colleagues who are on this panel, starting with the professor on the other side.
Yes. Coming
to the great man himself, Honorable Mbide, and of course, Madame Dr. Birete. Thank you very much for inviting us.
For a moment there, you hijacked the role of the moderator to introduce the panel.
No, thank you. For inviting us.
Okay.
And of course, it's a pity that they tried to kill Trump. That was very unfortunate. Whoever did it, it's not called for. No matter what vulgar language Trump uses, but that's fine. It's part of politics.
Thank you, sir. Next to the Honorable is Dr. Sarah Birete, the Executive Director of Center for Constitutional Governance and a lawyer. Good evening.
Good evening, Timothy and the viewers. Glad to be back on the show.
The one and only Honorable Mukasa Mbide, Deputy President of the Democratic Party, a lawyer, former legislator with the Yala. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. I equally greet my colleagues on the panel and our senior Honorable Francis Babu.
Finally, on my immediate left, Professor Sarah Sadi, a Dean at the School of Women and Gender Studies at Makerere University. Good evening, Professor.
Good evening, Timothy. Good evening, fellow panelists, and good evening, viewers.
So this East African body was first formed in 1967, collapsed in 1977. Two major reasons, there were many, but two major reasons. One, Kenya requested for more seats, but also the economic systems were different, especially between Kenya and Tanzania. Revived in 1999, took effect in 2000. The three presidents of Kenya, Tanzania, and Kenya were at the helm of it with Uganda there. And we want to be able to look at those when we take a double click, especially at the elections that have just concluded in Rwanda, but the results will be declared by the 20th of this month. Let's start there. You hinted on something with Trump, and I wanted a comment from each panelist here, especially that shooting. A lot of angles, a lot of security comments made there. Dr. Sarah, when you saw this shooting of Trump, what were your thoughts?
You know, election violence should be denounced and rejected by stakeholders globally. There's no space, you know, for assassinations, for coups, for such violence also related to the, you know, January 6th insurrection on the Capitol Hill. It's very unfortunate because the US is the only, you know, superpower in the world. There are other contending powers, China, but they are not at the level of the US. It's also the biggest economy at $25 trillion. So, and when you read their, you know, their security plans or their strategic security plans, they cover the globe to the detail. That information feeds into the world. So you can't discount their role in the world, whether you agree or disagree with one or two issues with them or not. But to the life of Trump, it's very unfortunate for anybody to try to take away another person's life. but also election violence of that magnitude. It's really very unfortunate, and we hope the US will have a successful election leading to November 5th on the voting, and then the announcement on 7th, and a new government.
Honorable Mbide, some have seen this as sympathy and Trump to really, I've been seeing some of the polls, CBN, some of the polls, Fox News, and it seems to have given him a few polling points going there. Him saying, don't take me off the stage, fist, putting up his fist there, today coming out with his ear really bandaged up there. Your thoughts on this, what they purport as an assassination attempt?
Well, you know, first of all, the fact that Trump can be shot at by an American civilian is itself a sense of humor. Yet obviously it is regrettable. When you look at the ardent supporters of private guns in the hands of persons in the United States, you find that Trump is a protagonist. At any attempt for you to raise the essence, of course now giving the historicity of gun violence in the United States, you find that Mr. Trump does not even want to listen. There was a time the late Nyerere was asked, when he was still running a one-party state, CCM, the Americans asked him why he's running a one-party state. He told them that even in the United States, there is actual one party, just that that party has divided itself into two. And when you look at the history of, obviously, the Democratic Party and the Republicans, obviously it was one party. So the division was anchored and hinged now on the ideological anchor chains of each of the parties. So I think there is a statement to the shooting that Mr. Trump himself should definitely also look at. We are looking at the praises showered around the one who had shot him. He is called, you know, the things they are talking about the boy that was actually shot, allegedly that had shot at Trump. The history they are creating around him is actually laughable. He was the best in his class. He was the best in this. In Rwanda, it is what we usually say, to firido muntu atazikaho, that we have lost somebody who actually is not replaceable. Now, you would expect the opposite, but what we are experiencing is actually also full of satire. So I think gun violence is a very serious problem in the United States, and all parties should adopt one single direction, and that is banning the multiplicity of guns in private control. Number one, because they cannot control the effect of anger and the actions of angry people towards either of the members of the population of the United States. Not even former presidents can be shot. When you look at Mr. Trump, he has introduced a different kind of politics in the United States, which is actually the kind of position he has taken can only be answered by anger against those he is not supporting. Why? Because he has created and formulated himself as an offshoot. He is an outgrowth in the Republican Party. In fact, instead of being loved and supported by members of the party, he is actually just like a dog wags its tail. This time the dichotomy is different. It is the tail now wagging its dog. and Mr. Trump is now actually the tail wagging the whole Republican Party. So everybody is now pushed and maneuvered into compliance support. Because whoever does not really compliantly support Trump actually is relegated to oblivion in the politics of the United States. They wish him away. But now the thing is, I think anybody can kill Trump. Because you see, for us lawyers, when there is an attempt to murder or a murder, the first question is, who benefits from the death of this person? Now, losers of primary elections in the Republican Party can also shoot Trump. The international community, obviously, given the operations of the United States and their outlook in terms of the border politique towards the international stage, either of those countries can also shoot Trump. Average population members can also shoot Trump. So Mr. Trump can also attempt a shooting against himself in order to attract sympathy support. So everything, all hypotheses can be looked at, and I think it is actually a very funny situation for the United States.
Thank you very much. Lastly, Professor, your comment and thoughts on this purported attempted assassination on former President Trump.
Yeah, thank you very much. One, it is, as everyone has said, it's a sad moment. It just shows the society as very intolerant to people of divergent views. But also it introduces a new thinking of what during Trump's time, President Trump's time, had been constructed as the problems. Because he did run his previous regime on a certain level of identity politics, where actually the threat to America was perceived as external. It was either people coming in as immigrants. It was everybody else except people of a certain race and a certain class. And now looking at the one who attempted to kill him, who is also white and who is also male, it invites another kind of paying attention to what actually the US politics and identity politics is becoming. So it is a sad moment. It shows levels of intolerance. It shows levels of discontent. But maybe this person being a cook probably sees what a second Trump presidency would mean for him, if that version is really true. But the other interesting thing out of all this thing, however sad it is which actually presents the American society as an interesting society, is the number of comic or satirical videos that have come out of this. And you know, the role of satire or the role of parody is to really introduce a certain level of critique to a subject. It could be humorous, but it is an invitation of let's look at things differently. So for the last 3 days, you know, there are so many little videos of people with bandaged ears trying to act out this. I think they are trying to paint another dimension in a way of saying maybe it's not true, or maybe it was stage managed, or maybe the heart was not really that. And of course, yesterday immediately he was discharged from the hospital. He went onto the streets greeting people and in the shops to try and assure people that he's fine. But again, I think this on the other side then adds to what people are saying, that maybe the attack was not that serious, maybe the attack was stage managed. So it is a sad moment, but it is also sad that to the American society this can be a subject of satire and entertainment, but probably that's what America is about, that there's free thinking and that anything can be looked at in multiple ways. So that is what I can.
Lastly, Honorable Babu, before we get into our topic of discussion here, especially looking at the attack that Dr. Sarah Birete mentioned on Capitol Hill, and then looking at this attempted assassination, what kind of person is Trump here?
You know, no, actually, we are being very unfair to Trump. United States of America has got a historical problem in politics with violence. If you go back in history, you will see how many presidents have been assassinated and how many the attempts that have been made on presidents. Now, one of the things that I'm saying, forget about all these satires, is one point it has brought a little bit of discipline. And the former President Trump has said he's changing his speech. And I think that's the greatest thing that has happened. He said he was going to attack his opponent, but now he's going to talk about unity of United States. To me, that is a plus. If anybody says, after this attempt, I think we need to change our method and unite United States, I am with Trump.
Okay.
You get my point? I
yes.
think that is the point. Yeah, it's something we should talk about.
And we shall wait for elections to be able to come to that. But now let me bring in Professor Herman Manyora, professor who is also a political analyst, a strategist in Kenya there. And let's start with Kenya. You have been a very busy country, especially for us to watch. Gen Zs on the street, the president and his deputy, seeming like a bromance is back of the both of them there. Let me start with a straight shooting question. Good evening, Professor, and it's good to have you. But let's start straight with the question. Is President Ruto's presidency at risk? And what does that mean for Kenya? Professor, I hope you can hear us here.
I can roughly guess you are talking to me. I told you, I told you your audio is poor.
I'm really sorry
It's
for the
breaking
audio
and cracking.
there.
I can hardly get what you are saying, and that's what I told you right from the start.
Did you hear my question to you, Professor?
I'm saying I can only guess you are talking to me.
So yes, Professor Manyora, I was asking especially what Kenya has been going through.
No. Excuse me, sir. I cannot get you. Your voice your audio is not good. It's poor.
Let the technical team sort out that. I'll be back to Professor there. I hope the technical team can get us sorted so that we can be able to have a conversation with him. Let me engage the team in the studio. Honorable Babu, when we start with Kenya here, something we have talked about over and over before we even get to Rwanda. One, Gen Zs go to the street, have no leader, have no ethnicity. They're trying to see that the things are sorted. The bill is thrown out, cabinet is thrown out, the IG leaves, Kome leaves the position there, seeming like Rigathi and the President Ruto come back into a bromance there. What do you make of the happenings in Kenya right now?
Well, the Kenyan problem is both historical and what it is presently. A lot of people tend to think that this thing started yesterday, or the other day when the Gen Zs came out. But I'm a very strong believer that the Kenyan problems have been building up for years. And it has been under there, and the latent heat has been, has been boiling the political scene. If you go back to the history of Kenya, Kenya in East Africa was a colony. Uganda was a protectorate, and Tanzania, because it was under the Germans as a colony, after the defeats of the German, it became a territory. Therefore, the approach of the colonial masters were different. In fact, until 1902, Uganda went up to Naivasha. But when the colonialists wanted land, they extended the border and took most of the land in Kenya, fertile land, and made them big commercial farms like in Zimbabwe and South Africa. From that point on, the average African was left on a reserve, on land that was not even fertile. Their children and grandchildren were born in those areas. So most of them moved on into cities. In fact, Nairobi, when I first went there, had areas of Asian, European, and African areas. So a lot of people that time, their children, they worked very hard and sent their children to the schools which were made by government. So those who went to those schools, when they came up, they're hardworking people. They tried to work hard and took their children to school. But most of those children were urban. They were not from villages like ours here. So you have a situation where you have urban populations of young people, highly educated, digital on top of that, using that word a Z you're using from Zoom because of using electronic means, being able to know what is going on and being empowered to ask questions. What apparently now culminated into this problem of the economy of Kenya. Kenya has got its own problems, both political and its corruption is unprecedented. These young people have been watching. Their parents have been watching. there is a group of people who had taken over the country politically, and they had taken over the economy. The average person is suffering beyond reproach. So the young people come out and say, no, we can't take it anymore. We can't take this poverty. We can't live in this. And they come out on the street. Because they are now empowered with these modern equipments, they are able to contact each other. In fact, they've got networking. Everybody on these machines can start a network. They start groups, they start networking, and they tell each other what is going on. And that's exactly how they came out. And therefore, your Gen Zs, the ones who do not have leaders, but they have leaders because they can communicate each other and they have a networking system.
Thank you very much. Let me bring in Dr. Sarah. Dr. Sarah, when you look at these happenings, I have seen you comment on these happenings since they began. Are these happenings or demonstrations political or moral? And where's the fine line? Where do we draw the fine line of where the direction of Kenya is going?
I think I would call the protests socio-economic because of the cause. We need to underscore, the fact that Kenya has had generations of protests. They normally demand or actualize their rights with their feet, as they commonly say in Nairobi. Since the Mau Mau uprising, you can look at the protests after the Kisumu massacre in 1969. You can look at the failed coup attempt in 1982, and then when Moi arrested Raila before they reconciled to work together. There are pro-democracy protests in the 90s and the demand for return of multipartyism. Then you come to the 2002, the transition to multi-party democracy, the Rainbow Coalition, the Orange Movement for the new constitution, and then the post-election violence in 2008. We also have the anti-corruption protests in 2011, 2012, post-election protests 2017, then the costs against the high cost of living in 2022, there after the elections. So it has been a series of protests with relative freedom to protest peacefully, but also skirmishes of violence that happen as the confrontation goes on. Usually the government of Kenya listens. Kenya has also had 3 presidents dissolving cabinet. The first was Kenyatta, when he removed the Mzee Jaramogi as VP. The second was Mwai Kibaki after the defeat of the constitution referendum, when he dismissed all his cabinet in 2005. Then you can look at Moi, and Moi has now issued a gazette that is really interesting. In the Kenyan Gazette, confirming the dismissal of his cabinet, but also showing that Musalia Mudavadi is now an acting minister for all dockets. So he's an acting minister for everything. that has been the joke on X. Yeah, so and I hope that by next week he will appoint a new cabinet, because that's really problematic. So, having said that, when you come to the demands that I've called socio-economic, they are driven by high cost of living, high taxation, leaders living in opulence, corruption, vague budgets, going into unconstitutional offices. Then you have a continuation of whole demand on cabinet must go. And Ruto has made a number of concessions so far, starting with doing away with the finance bill, then the dismissal of cabinet, but also reforms in the budget, including removal of office of First Lady and Second Lady, removal of classified budgets, calling for national dialogue, which some sectors of society are dismissing, and I don't know whether it will happen. But we've also had the resignation of the IGP. These are not small concessions, but still the young people are still on the streets yesterday.
And that's the question.
Today.
Who are the losers and the benefactors of such? Cabinet, IGP, concessions? Who loses, who benefits?
No, when the cabinet, Ruto in his 12-minute speech dismissing his cabinet, he did indicate that he did appraise of his cabinet and found it wanting. So I think cabinet stands to serve the people. If they are the one who appointed them, because cabinet, the power for the executive authority belongs to the president. The president determines who to share his executive authority with, or who should support him to fulfill his executive mandate to a nation. So if Ruto stated that he did an appraisal and found those ministers wanting, it means that they could not help him deliver his functions as the head of the executive. But also, cabinet exercises its executive authority in the interest of the people. So when the people say, or remove, take away their confidence from your executive, you could be next. Because the people actually in a democracy can remove their mandate.
But Dr. Sarah, before I come to Honorable Mbide there's also discussion of a broad-based government, especially in his cabinet that he is proposing. What does that mean? Does that mean we're getting back into a handshake? Does that mean the alliances that were there, rainbow and all these things, are these feasible to be brought back into this cabinet?
I had an opportunity of observing Kenyan elections. A difference of 200,000 votes in a highly contested election is evidence of a divided country. It's almost 50-50. So when you are ruling a country with that slim margin, you are walking on eggshells. Because it was divided from day one. Because it was 50 point something and 49. You know, very uncomfortable for any leader that could have emerged victorious in that race. So when you have these contestations then coming in, I think for me, as much as the Gen Zs are winning through the decisions so far taken, I think also Ruto is a winner by listening to the people. Because what is a democracy? Democracy is a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. That's the most basic definition. So in a democracy, if people are saying we suggest you do ABC and you do it, I think that both the people and the leader are winners. I wish there could be this dialogue, or also a government of national unity, because you're leading a divided country. This is the second time there are major protests since Ruto assumed power. In 2 years, you have the Mandamo demonstrations about the cost of living. The slogan was Unga, the price for Unga, that spent about 8 months. You have now these major protests by young people for 3 weeks that have paralyzed Nairobi. These protests found me in Nairobi, day 1 and day 2, and day 3, after some semblance of calm, day 2 in the night we had to shift and sleep near the airport because we were not sure whether the capital stay would be possible. And for the first time, I found an empty Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Actually, all airlines kept shifting flights so that they could have a reasonable number of passengers to fly. That small number was not even seen during COVID times, because I did travel to Nairobi during COVID times. It was the first time in my travel history to find an empty airport. How much loss was that? People have estimated losses that Nairobi makes on a daily basis to somehow 2 billion when there's a total paralyzation of business. This is a big economy. So when you have had these protests for 3 weeks, any sensible leader would work around the clock to stabilize the country, because the losses, including the human lives, the capital, the progress that would be made, It's too much. It's a high cost.
Thank you very much. Honorable Mbide, you have been a legislator at the Yala there. When you look at the happenings in Kenya, vis-a-vis the whole region, can Ruto survive this?
Thank you. First of all, why would our analysis based on whether Ruto survives or the contrary? The East African community, and particularly the hinterland countries like Uganda, these are the countries that do not have direct access to the sea. Based on what the economists call the thy neighbor syndrome. It is established that the economic effect of instability in a country like Kenya subtends a similar effect economically to a hinterland country like Uganda, extremely similar, as if the instability were located in Uganda itself. Therefore, if the assessment economically is to the extent that Kenya loses this much, the assessment must also equally be subtended to Uganda's economy, that is what we lose daily. And mind you, Uganda, in terms of net trade, had almost now established an inverse proportion. That the amount of export that Uganda actually does with Kenya is now more than what actually Kenya does to Uganda, to the extent that Kenya had shifted its market export to Congo DRC. So our losses are not anything for Ugandans to jubilate about. But what causes what is happening in Kenya? You see, when you look at Kenya, of course Kenya lost out on an opportunity to establish consensus, historical consensus in determination of who leads Kenya. Dr. Sarah here has given you some history. When you look at the politics that obtained towards independence, there we are protagonists. We looked at the United States at the time, of course, where the king player was the America's ambassador to Kenya. And that was during the period of the Cold War, where you were required to establish as to whether or not you were pro-East or pro-West. And then we were looking at a person who was later to be the first leader of Kenya in prison. When Oginga Odinga, the late, was given an opportunity by departing colonialists to lead, while Kenyatta was in prison, he declined that leadership and said, there is no way I can take up such leadership when the father of the country is in prison. The Europeans confirmed to him that to them he's a better leader and that he can perform a better job, to which he actually answered, how can I be better than my teacher? Accordingly, they had no option but to release Kenyatta to come and lead. Wherefore, of course, Oginga was later to become vice president. Now the politics that played along, the intrigues that were also, of course, facilitated by the CIA, brought a mechanism where now the leader then of KADU, who is Mr. Moi, was brought to replace Oginga Odinga. You can imagine that degree of betrayal. It became ethnic betrayal between the Luo and the Kikuyu, which actually wagged on, causing arrests, killings, and all of that. And Dr. Sarah has clearly given a proper adumbrration of the records as they are. Now, when you look at what happened during the recently concluded elections, we saw now the Kikuyu with historical animosity against Luos now coming together, one backing the other for president. And that was going to be dubbed the national consensus, which actually did not take place. That is why the election in Kenya was now not based on tribes during that period. But that was an establishment of a new political dispensation in Kenya at the time. That now it became hustlers versus Selilaka babies. Those that actually were fed on Selilak by all those that were feeding on the consolidated fund of Kenya versus the hustlers. Now, when you actually become a representative of the hustlers, the meaning is that now the vote is based on the promises you have made. What happened? when President Ruto actually took power, he forgot that he actually took power on the basis of +1, and that there were wrangles and extreme ludic against his swearing in, because people believed, some people believed that actually he did not rightfully take that office. But there was some bit of what actually the court did not address itself to, and that is the scientific methods of vote counting that were not opened, because the servers would not be opened, the orders would not reach Israel because they were out of jurisdiction. Now, instead of looking forward to establishment of a government of national unity, then he announced a cabinet against the opposition that had been established in parliament by way of a minority report. Against that same cabinet, by the way. He instead chose, because there was a parliament capture, he was all and at large, and he thought he was now in auto drive, led the country against all corners of advice, and I can tell you safely that that was later going to collapse. So the cabinet had suffered, of course, were prognostic of incompetencies, and these were also given as details before the floor of the House, but he did not listen. The minority report pointed out theft and unethical behavior of a multiplicity of members that had been appointed as members of cabinet. The president didn't listen. What happened? They now established the kind of politics of prebendalism. They helped themselves to state resources, and instead they fed the media by way of social media to all types of ostentatious behavior. They would show the best cars, the best houses, would tell off anybody who would raise a question against their behavior, and that now raised untold anger, animosity against the person and the cabinet of President Ruto. To the extent that now, President Ruto, I think, does not have the opportunity to promise, because he is not believed that he is a kind that can fulfill promises. Now, a government of national unity would obviously apply, but we are looking at a situation where the Gen Zs have operated in such a way that they have established and erected a threatening wall around all politicians, to the extent that today you find now Raila Odinga almost backtracking on all the promises and antics that he had adopted, pursuant to, of course, the mediation between him and Ruto that was, of course, designed by President Obasanjo. I can tell you that there is now a very difficult situation in Kenya. He is attempting now working back together with the Gachagua, but I can tell you that if you won by 50 plus 1%, and you have run the country the way President Ruto has done, then I can safely tell you that now his approval ratings have even gone less than 30%. Now the young people, first of all, the fight by the young people, the Gen Zs, is amorphous. It is headless. They say it is tribeless.
Partyless.
But it is partyless. But intelligence is also pointing towards the 6 players. That some politicians, 3 of them in Nairobi, 2 based in the Highlands. There is an NGO. There is work that is ongoing. To me, it is a paradox. It is enigmatic. I do not think there is a possibility that leaderless groups can sustain the kind of bangaranga that these young people have sustained on streets of Kenya. To the extent that when you now look at what is happening in Baringo, which is believed to be the Rwachtura of Mr. Ruto, because the support base must be anchored there. Today, the governor had to close himself within office because he had been besieged by the former supporters.
After the Chief Justice yesterday.
Yes. I can safely tell you that what is happening in Kenya cannot be given you cannot habinja. To habinja is to foretell. Yes. There is no way you can quickly sit here and safely foretell that what is happening in Kenya has got the best future. Because what is happening in Kenya, the disappearances of persons, the exuding of dead bodies from Kware, I can safely think that probably President Ruto and some of his henchmen are proper candidates for ICC. And when ICC gets into play within the politics of Kenya, you will know that probably instead of President Ruto campaigning for the next term, he could actually be praying to conclude this first term.
And we'll start from that one there, especially where you ended the next term. Professor, you have seen these effects there. Gen Z's coming out, tribalists, leaderless, gone on for 3 weeks now, cabinet put down, discussions of a broad-based. Is President Ruto playing to the gallery, and how does this affect his prospects for 2027, and what does East Africa stand to see in this?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think to answer your first question, whether President Ruto is playing to the gallery, I think there is a possibility of that. First of all, when these things started, we were all dismissive about it. So we thought the younger people would do their thing and get off the street. But quite early, they begin chanting that Ruto must go. And that chant has not gone down. So as the colleagues here have said, the president has tried to give a number of concessions, hoping that it will allay the fears. But you see, the demands continue. And as my colleague has just said, my fellow panelists, it is a social movement. And the issue with social movement is that they are fluid. Free entry, free exit. You sometimes may not know who is leading. But and because you are not aware of who is leading, you cannot necessarily go out and negotiate beforehand. So you have to wait on a daily, what is the new demand they are going to make. So as he has said, there are people who are being suspected. The president himself has accused some NGOs like Ford Foundation.
Yes.
The NGOs have come out to deny that. The other day, he was actually talking of a certain NGO in the US, which is collecting money to finance this. Some political analysts will see this as the wider scheme of destabilizing potentially successful African states, so as to keep them at the whims of the developed world. So he's running a tightrope, because whatever he has done, the chants for Ruto must go continue. But also there's another thing which happens. When you wake up, I know this is the third time cabinet is being dissolved, but it is the first time it's being dissolved because of demands of such a movement. So to what extent are those that have been dissolved to blame for what is happening? And that is likely to distort people's loyalties, because you know politics is put together. Political parties really run on loyalties and the connections they make, which are not necessarily formal and observable by all. So if because of the demands of the public you have to ask 1, 2, 3, 4 and all, then those who come in will actually have to be very, very careful, because they may not necessarily trust you as a leader, so that they cover your back, because you can easily, maybe, but we hope he made certain concessions when he was setting them off. But I also think this may have to be seen within a wider thing of what is happening in Kenya. Kenya's foreign debt is around 6 to 8%. So, because this thing starts off as a response to a finance bill, where taxes were increased. Why are taxes being increased? Because it has 68% debt as part of GDP. Why does it have 68% debt as part of GDP? Of course, one way you can say that is wasteful, but I mean, this is a country which went before us in trying to liberalize an economy, have market-led growth. And of course, market-led growth has a paradox within it, in that you will have private enterprise actually growing, but you also have inequality growing, social inequality. But so, and the populations continue to grow. So what happens with such scenarios is that as the level of inequality widens, as the gap widens, you will always have these kinds of discontents and the people coming onto the streets. I mean, in a few years before, we saw really the Greek riots in 2008, which actually began as university riots responding to police on campuses. But ideally, it became a nationwide riot about people not able to find jobs, and because they are not able to find jobs, they have the energy to be on the streets all the time. So economic crises of this nature actually do because you see, politics is a way economics is organized. So if you have a problem economically, it will actually spill out and will be articulated politically with regard to looking at who should have, who should not have, who is wasteful, who is not wasteful. So the people who are living in opulence and excesses, and those who are really rich and flashing, and actually Kenya has rich guys. These are people who have, over the years since the 70s, when they liberalized, have been located strategically to benefit from those processes, as the majority of people are actually falling off. So then you will ask, okay, the economic reforms or the taxation bills were not only introduced in Kenya, they were read like that in the whole East African region. Why aren't we having this here? So, whereas you can have that in Uganda with our size of arable land, it sort of cushions. When you talk with Kenyans, they tell you the advantage Ugandans have is you have food. For us, any small increase in the price of unga is enough to create a political crisis. But here, if the price of unga is high, people will maybe choose to eat mayuni, and then they will choose to eat other things. And with a lot of Christianity, they will blame themselves for not being able. Rarely do people look at the state as a problem for their social ills. But you have a very urbanized, fairly urbanized society, which has been, it has fairly better economic power, so they have been richer. They have had many things before we had them. So they can organize, their level of tech permutation is very, very high. So you have a problem in that you have an economic policy of more than 30 years of a market-led economy, even when they have tried to get back at state-led development. And by this, taxation is one of the vehicles for you to get back a level of state-led development so that you have resources that then you can channel out as the state. So it is likely to lead to these kinds of things. So we have to look at the economics, the defunding of development, and the promotion of the market for a very long period, around 4 decades. And then you have these kinds of younger people, because they don't have jobs, but they are living in a society with a lot of economic inequality. Some people have a lot, some people have nothing.
Professor, you mentioned an NGO, Ford Foundation there. Allegations, also Honorable Mbide has mentioned it, allegations on them supporting these Gen Zs there. This whole demonstration beginning to have a face, especially with that allegation, goons coming on the street, it becoming political. When you look at this and look at the US and look at the influence of the West and the East, is there influence from either the East and the West to have this fueled and have it continue, and to what benefit?
Well, thank you. Well, I don't know what the Kenyan intelligence say, so, but this is what they have said. But it is also possible that the champions, the global champions of democracy, actually have been promoting democracy worldwide. And some of this has been through direct entry, like you see in Libya, Iraq, and the rest. But the other has been over a period of time, where you have many young scholars. You know, when we get scholarships to go and study abroad, we just get happy because we have achieved and we are the excellent, we are Rhodes scholars, we are Mandela Washington scholars and the rest. But those who give the scholarships understand the role of education in actually cultural imperialism. Because it is also true that when many of us go to those places, we come back thinking that those places are the best places. So even when you're in a government job, you will believe in a British model because you went to Britain. You will believe in an American model because you went to America. You will believe in a Chinese model because you went to China. So even in your positionality as an officer, that is where you look to for wisdom, for inspiration. So with this, of course, I'm not sure whether Ford Foundation is funding, but that's what the Kenyan intelligence is saying. But the truth is that also the US has had a long history of promoting younger people, either as Rhodes scholars, either as Mandela Washington scholars, as Obama scholars. So there are all these scholarship programs around leadership. And around these scholarship programs, younger people are told, you are the future of Africa, you are the majority. And you know, these are promoted in a way they are not promoted in the West. In the West, no one would go and tell a 20-year-old, you are the future of this country, therefore take charge. Make sure your voice is heard, okay? You still have 70+ people dominating the political space. But when it comes to Africa, you know, you're told some people are overstayed, some people are very old. You younger people, you're the majority, you're 67%, you're 70% of them. So your voice must count on the table. You must be in charge. You must take charge. And actually, younger people come back thinking these things. And they want to see these things take charge. So you end up, of course, for Uganda's case, you just have very many talk shows of younger people, whether they have the experience of statecraft or they have read widely about how these things work, doesn't matter. What happens is that younger people are having a say and that they're participating and that they are talking, okay? So now where you have, I mean, like some of these big scholarships have also been going to Kenya, where you have the majority of younger people like that in Kenya also moving around, very well organized, lacking jobs. The price of unga is going up, taxation is going up. I mean, you're going to have people well organized to do these kinds of things. So it does not necessarily mean a particular country is particularly out to destabilize. But it lends credence to the accusation that the West will not allow Africa settle, okay? And whether it is true or false, the jury is out there, but this is how these things play out. So we are seeing Kenya, but we don't know which other country will play out next. But I know Kenya is because of its level of economic development, its population size, its level of organization, its levels of literacy, and so many other things. But the accusations are out there, so we are yet to hear more from the Kenyan intelligence.
Let's first get some feedback here. A lot of feedback coming through. Behind the headlines, good evening. The US has been involved in assassination of leaders they do not agree with around the world. Therefore, over the time, the population has learned that this is a way to deal with leaders you do not like. This is Aboki Fred. Thank you very much. This is Maxine Jamila from Koboko. Says East Africa community should strategize on its fundamental issues like the economy, politics, social development, rather than being pulled into parts of forces other than of the other world. The world superpowers, the ideology of confronting East and West conflicts within the community. Lastly, the leaders of the community should act in a transparent manner. Okay? Thank you so much for the show, Senior Timothy. This is Ofono, live from Mbale. According to me, the people in Kenya want all Ruto's government out of the office. The protests will affect Uganda through trade. Okay? Very good one there. Lastly, so that we take a break. Thank you for the show. Among the demands by the Gen Zs, there is no dialogue. The point to put forward by the Gen Zs includes full accountability in delivering services, fulfillment of promises made during the campaigns, and job creation. This is Magindu in Nairobi. The main issue which triggered this riot was mainly open corruption, extravagance, wasteful expenditure. Since the West will not let others settle us, let's settle with a break here after this.
Juko. Yo. What you check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Haven't you heard of the parish development model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, it is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that. The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines. Even as we get into this last leg of the show, my name is Timothy Nyangweso. In the studio, I'm joined by Professor Sarah Sari, Honorable Mukasambide, Dr. Sarah Virete, and Honorable Captain Francis Babu. Apologies, Edgar Tabaro wasn't feeling well and could not make it here, and we pray for his quick recovery, but also the technical issue to not be able to get Professor Herman Manyoro there to be able to come and discuss some of the issues happening in Kenya there. But let's continue with discussion here. You can be part of the show. Let us know what you think. Number is 0709 60 25 92. Let us know what you think by text or WhatsApp there. Honorable Babu, let me come to you. Let's get to the people that have stayed in cabinet. 3 to be exact. The president himself, the head of the executive, his deputy Rigathi Gachagua there, Mudavadi also the prime cabinet secretary who stayed there. And first and foremost, before this, the deputy and the president seemed to be at loggerheads. Then there was this whole Mountain Kenya meeting. Then the cabinet is chased. Then they seemed to have a new bromance that even the deputy was given a chopper to take him wherever he was going. When you look at these two, are we already playing into 2027? Because they seem to be reading off the same script and agreeing. And also we remember Ruto and Uhuru towards the elections of 2022. What do you make of the dynamics between the first two people in this country?
Thank you very much. I think the problem we're having is we are really outside with information the president of Kenya receives. And with that information, the president of Kenya makes decisions. And the decision is, it's better to even bring your enemy closer in such a situation now than letting them be very far. That's point number one. Point number two, you need a buffer in this kind of situation. Let's look at those two. One comes from Western Kenya. The other one comes from the mountains. Those are two buffers. He now needs another one from the coast. So it is up to him to decide how he wants to buffer himself during this particular problem. In my sincere opinion, and I think he has played it very well, to an extent that the Gen Zs now are saying they don't want to hear certain people who have been coming up to hijack this particular move. From what I hear, the Gen Zs are saying we don't want all those people. We don't want handshakes, we don't want this. What we want is we want you to go. But who is saying we want you to go? Is it the Gen Zs, or is it because somebody has hijacked the situation as it is? So I want us to be very careful whenever we talk about a man like a president. The president has got a lot of information coming in and a lot of intelligence coming in, and he has to make a decision every move he makes. And now he has to be very careful. Whatever decision he makes, whatever he says is extremely important. But what made me, you're talking about the ones he has reigned with, but one of the gentlemen came on social media and said he wants to apologize to Kenyans, he wants to do this, and he wants to return some of the money he received in bribery in Dubai. So you can see that there are certain things which are playing along. And then there's the point of the IEBC, where a certain group of people saying that they should elect a new chairman. And this sort of brought them together. It sort of brought them together now. Now, the whole point is, he is trying to find a way to move. He's moving in landmines, if you like. It's a landmine. And he's finding his way around the landmines. And he's doing a very good job, as far as I'm concerned. Now, let me say this. Whatever the case might be, and you asked this question earlier on, you're thinking about 1920s. We're thinking about now how to stabilize Kenya now, not the elections. The elections will come later. The question one should ask, and should ask yourself and even the Kenyans, if you removed Ruto now, what next?
Where did the debt go?
Will it be a success? Or could it even be worse? So removing Ruto or leaving Ruto, you've got to balance this when you're making this decision. I saw the former internal secretary coming to talk about himself, that he's ready to come and take over. I think you saw that also. Now, that gentleman, I'm sorry, with a lot of respect, I think Ruto is miles away from him. And as far as I'm concerned, your question about the two gentlemen he has brought along, these are people who represent certain forces, and he needs those forces now to be able to plod along until he finds a solution to all the problem he's got. And he's coming up to the cabinet, and he needed these particular two to give him the cabinet that he needs. So what is going to happen now is we see what the cabinet is going to be next week. And that is going to give us a decision, has he made the right choice? And the Gen Zs, will they accept this? Will the population of Kenya accept this? Because it's no longer the Gen Zs, it's the whole of Kenya now. The Gen Zs have reached a point where the whole of Kenya is convinced that certain things should be done in a certain way. So new culture is going to come up. The culture has to change. People have to become a little bit more polite. My dear sister here said something very nice. It's the people who are going to make a decision now. And I think most politicians, not only in Kenya, in the whole of Africa, even in this country, must realize it's the people who matter. And therefore the leaders must be humble and must have a bit of humility and must say the right thing at the right time.
Before I come to Honorable Mbide, he has a response there. How much did the Kenyan Mountains meeting play a role, especially in this bromance that we're talking about here?
That's what I was telling you earlier on. This man is smart. He knows where the power bases are. And therefore his method was to use that group to sort of say, listen, by the way, the people who would lose most if there were more instability in that Kenya would be Mount Kenya, because that's where the richest Kenyans are. And that's one point I want to tell you. Whenever people have got, they've got the economic power, they don't want to lose it.
Economic stake.
Yeah, they've got an economic stake in the country. And therefore, Mount Kenya has a bigger economic stake than any other part of Kenya. They have to be very careful. So these are all very important points that one has to consider. Therefore, we should not sit here and speculate. We should look at the move, because those moves tell us exactly that President Ruto is in a track and plodding along with all these landmines around. I think he will get on the other side.
Thank you very much. Honorable Mbide, you had a comment, then I'll come to Dr. Sarah.
Yes, of course, I wanted to also support the Honorable Captain. When you look at, of course, obviously, Kenya is having deputy presidents in pursuit of the 2010 Constitution. Before that, they used to have vice presidents that would be appointed by the president. When you look at the history of Musalia Mudavadi, even when Moi was about to go, he was appointed vice president. I think he has the shortest term in the history of Kenya as vice president. So you don't know whether history is playing itself around, to the extent that obviously Gachagua wouldn't be touched because he was voted deputy president. He wasn't appointed by that president. Also, in addition to what Honorable Babu has said, I think Ruto has now triggered a campaign mood. First, in order to occupy and conclude the current term of office, and then to also begin planning for any other term that would be, of course, commensurate with the actions that he would take now. Why? Because now he's going back now to their divide of Kenya Kwanza versus Azimio. Because it is very difficult for Ruto to exist if he loses the highlands. It is extremely, almost impossible. It is a logical impossibility. And he would only survive because there had been established a divide between those that will follow the former President Uhuru's message and those that would definitely follow Gachagua, who is his deputy president. Now, dividing the vote of the Kikuyu is what sustained the 50-50 win. And the +1, which was established, those that support Ruto, the 200,000 votes, that were won and obtained freely and fairly. And for those that opposed him, they called them scientific. So that means, obviously, the 50-50 support for both Azimio and Kenya Kwanza are because of a divide in the highlands. Now, when you lose the islands, of course, when you now attempt to alienate Gachagua, who is the deputy president, and you force him again to establish an alliance with the former president Uhuru, which obviously then now follows Azimio, which Azimio has, by the way, and all the alliances, all the allies that form Azimio are against the dialogue except Raila. And obviously now Raila was. When you look at the kind of meetings. Yes. Now the Gen Zs have a problem. They have been taught by teachers who told them two major things. One, that you are leaders of tomorrow. Now when they look at teachers, they are in there tomorrow and they are not leaders. So meaning being young does not really, it's not a guarantee that you will be a leader tomorrow. Number two, they have told them that education is the key. Now they look at teachers that have obtained that education and begin to find out which key did these teachers use and where did they open. So the young people have now gone to the streets. They are demonstrating, taking selfies. They are not insulting policemen. And the policemen are also facing the first kind of demonstration in the history of Kenya where the demonstrators are speaking English. So you can see that they are also stuck. They don't know what to do. The demonstrators are not doing anything. They are taking selfies with the
And the policemen are giving them water.
Yes, and they are so happy. In fact, when the government attempted to bring infiltrators that would in effect cause chaos, the demonstrators now worked against the infiltrators. They are the ones now that hand them over to police. Whether you release them or not, that is your business.
There is a point there that you must get very clear.
Yes.
There is maturity in conversation.
Yes.
Whenever people have differences and they sit and converse, Mount Kenya talking to Ruto, people from the West talking to Ruto, that is maturity in politics.
And they are raising issues. So they are not talking of any tribesman or tribeswoman. They are saying, no, you must go because of this.
Let me come to Dr. Sarah. Dr. Sarah, as I know you have a comment, but I would like to throw this there. Also as an observer of elections, 2025, Tanzania will be going to the polls. The president has dropped the intelligence officers twice. 2026, Uganda will be going to the polls. 2027, Kenya will go to the polls. We have just concluded Rwanda's polls. Where does this leave the East African bloc?
Yeah, you have skipped South Sudan and Somalia. South Sudan and Somalia have elections in November and December this year, respectively.
I've actually met one consignment of posters heading to. They were being made, of course, any route to South Sudan. So
yes, South Sudan has elections on 22nd.
I hope you're not standing in South Sudan.
A colleague of mine was in charge of posters, so I have seen some.
so yes, it's a phase for elections in the region. We've just concluded Rwanda, of course, this week. Then in November, it's Somaliland, and then December.
No, Somalia. Somaliland is different.
It's a totally different country.
No, I know, but in November the elections are in Somaliland.
Somaliland itself,
yes,
okay.
Yes. Yeah, then in December we have South Sudan, and as a chairperson, I work in all that region. But also Somalia now is part of the East African community, as well as South Sudan, so you have the community going into electioneering non-stop. We hope that, but elections by nature are supposed to reinforce stability. But because we have messy elections, so we look at them as a trigger or a possible trigger for conflict, and we look at the political cost of elections as a political risk instead of the other way around. So the best preventive measure would be that we give elections their due place in democracy as stabilizers instead of political risks and conflict triggers that they are in the Great Lakes region as a whole. So let's practice democracy and mean what we say, other than stage-managed democracy and short-changing people, which triggers conflicts. shortchanging the will of the people is the cause of conflict. So let's move away with shortchanging the will of the people and give people democracy. Let people be governed according to their will. But when you tamper with that will, it's what causes instability in our regions. And we need to move away from that. But staying, you know, keeping our tabs on Kenya, just today the police chief has banned demonstrations in the Nairobi Central Business District and its environment, citing difficulty in enforcing safety protocols due to a leaderless approach of the Gen Zs. So the issue is that they have no leaders to agree on the safety protocols, and they are unable to secure the Central Business District anymore. So they've banned protests, and we are yet to see whether that will trigger more protests or we'll have protests now moving out of the Central Business District. But I wanted to comment as a member of the not-for-profit sector. I wanted to comment on the allegations about NGOs in Kenya. I watched the clip where Ruto did allege that the Ford Foundation was funding protests. The Ford Foundation, since its establishment in 1963, has a known grant-making process. It's the most bureaucratic grant-making process, from the region to the Africa office to the global office. I don't think anybody can process a grant for protests through Ford Foundation. I don't think so. Previously, in protests, the Kenyan government used to blame open society, and of course the non-liberal approach of the head of open society globally, and his support for social justice. So open society used to be the punching bag for such events. We know open society, we know. But now, because open society has been going through restructuring and they don't have activities in the field, it's no wonder that the scapegoating has now shifted to another grant-making NGO in Nairobi. And why do I call it scapegoating? I know that some of the people that have been aiding the protesters, like the retired Chief Justice William Tunga, he used to work with the Ford Foundation. And I think when people see him going to police to look for arrested protesters, they don't know that he was a judicial activist even before becoming the Chief Justice. So he's now back to his judicial activism, because he never left anyway, even in his tenure. He maintained that judicial activism. So those linkages are what could be causing the scapegoating. I've seen the statement of the Ford Foundation, and I know how they work, and I don't think you can process a short-term quick grant through Ford Foundation. That alone makes it impossible for them to fund things like protests. But also their principles of grant making, they are pure and non-partisan. So scapegoating cannot take away the problems. I think it's important for leaders, and I've seen the same in Uganda, where civil society has become a punching bag. You are foreign enemy, foreign agent, grant you. When the government itself depends on the same donors. So this scapegoating cannot solve the questions of the day. Let the Kenyan leaders address the issues raised by Gen Zs. Whether Gen Zs are bankrolled or not, it doesn't matter. Do they have issues they are raising? And can you address them, other than running around with scapegoating?
Thank you very much. Professor, lastly, before we switch to where we're supposed to be next, when you look at the times, especially when we go to West Africa and look at Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and then come down to East Africa, are we in touch with the realities, the times, and the waves that are coming, especially affecting the social, economic, but also the politics of the continent?
Wow, that's a difficult one. But anyway, I'll try. I think what happened with the Francophone belt in West Africa was an inspiration to other people. And maybe even that is to start with it early. But if you look at Tahrir Square before that, and the North African issue, around, and these are again things triggered by younger people. Of course, there's a trigger of an economic somebody whose vegetables are taken, but really you have younger people who highly educated, not employed. That is a recipe for trouble. They are healthy, they can actually engage you on the streets. So what you've seen in West Africa is again very well-trained guys, they're military guys, they're younger people. And the one I think for Niger is even American trained. And they thought this one would be one of their own, but he has switched to the other side. And what are the people raising in all these things? Issues of economic inequality. And why is economic inequality a problem? Lack of development to match the galloping population and its needs. So we happen to have a population which is growing very, very fast. And these people are, with globalization and the internet, they're well connected. They see what is happening elsewhere. They want to see this also back home. So it is important, and it is just, obvious that they are going to aspire the same things. So it's not that we are out of touch. I think we are aware, or those who lead us are aware of the needs of this population. That's why at every budget reading, promises are made. At every national development plan cycles, promises are made. And each of these countries, by the way, have all these kinds of policies, whether national development plan, parish development, constituency development funds in Kenya. They are aware of the problem that they need. President Ruto himself campaigned on an identity politics, connecting himself with the people as hustlers, and showed the people that he understood where they were coming from, and he was the man who was going to solve where they were the problem that they were having. What you are seeing is the challenge that the leaders have in Africa is, it's very much actually the challenge they even had at independence. How do we meet the needs of our people with the resources that we have? So at independence, you saw many people promising a lot, and when they came to power, they were actually told they cannot, because of these very global economic pacts and treaties and what people must do and what people must not do. In the 1980s, after phases of liberation and counter-liberation, you had actually people coming, and even our own regime came into power castigating the IMF, the World Bank, why there was no development, why the country was so poor. But again, you see, when they come in, the same World Bank and IMF comes with a lot of conditionality. So you have African leaders coming in with a lot of euphoria, a lot of popular support, but reaching there and failing to perform because they realize that the theater they are playing in is not only national, but it is also global, okay? And the global pressure makes it sometimes difficult for them to develop and give their people the resources they have. So at the end of the day, you then have disgruntled populations vis-a-vis a leadership which is trying its best. And then to the disgruntled population, people then look like, the leaders look like they don't care. And if you have seen some of the demands of the Gen Zs, they are encouraging the population to look at particular governors, senators, or whoever they are, or government officials, compare the person's salary with what the person has. So if the person has this salary, has this kind of watch, drives this kind of car, takes kids to this kind of school, then that person must be corrupt. So they are coming up with their own model. Because if they are so poor and if they are struggling, how come you have? So you're actually having a social problem, which is worse than what they are having, brewing up. Because if we now begin, if we were to walk down on the streets of Kampala, you look like this and you earn like this, and therefore, you're leaving out things like people could actually inherit, people could actually have other sources of income, although corruption actually should be challenged. So we are yet to see how much the leaders in West Africa will deliver on the aspirations the people have welcomed them with. Of course, they have made, like the leader of Burkina Faso has made it clear, if we are to lose, we are not losing anymore, because France has been with us for 63 years, and we are poorer than that. But there is another bigger problem. In Africa, we pride on having the natural resources, the fertile, and actually we have the natural resources that everyone is looking for, which is the reason Africa will never be allowed to settle. But The others who would want to manage us are very clear on, you have the resources, but you have no means of going down there to get them. Because if you're talking about small gold panning in Busitem and Karamoja, that is okay, you'll get the sand and sift. But the real gold deposits are more than 2 kilometers underground. Serious breathing, normal breathing of the workers stops before you reach 1 kilometer. So for you to be able to construct chutes, to put people down there, to function very well as human beings and be able to extract, you need a lot of investment, which actually many of our countries do not have. That's why you see when France is asked to leave Mali, to leave Mauritania, to leave, one of the things they do is to destroy the infrastructure. Because they know as long as they've destroyed it, you cannot go in.
They did it in Conakry, Guinea.
Yes, they did that.
When they left, they actually destroyed the whole town.
They destroyed everything. They destroyed that in Mali. So what is the message? You have the resources, you need us to go down. And if we are the ones to go down to get them for you, we shall determine the terms on which we extract, we shall determine the price, we shall determine. So in short, what I'm saying is not that leaders are out of touch. Leaders are actually in touch. That is how they campaign, that's how they make policies. But they are saddled with a very fast-growing population, which has needs and aspirations as of a developed world, but they lack the means to deliver. And why do they lack the means? The West will not allow them to deliver and to get the means to meet the population, because then that will make Africa independent and will not need the West.
And that's well put there. But I wanted to ask, is this now a competition in economic systems? Because we first embraced capitalism, now it seems like we're drifting towards socialism in this sense, because we want to have this, we want to have these social effects there. Is this a competition between what economic system works best for our region?
I wouldn't see it as a competition, Timothy. I would see it as determining a system that works for your people. I think we've made a mistake in the past, running after capitalism. When it didn't work, we ran after socialism, then it didn't work. We are running after mixed methods, it is not working. I think we need to understand that every economic system arises in a particular context and a particular historical moment. And it arises to meet the internal contradictions of a certain society and a particular community at a time. So it is erroneous to think that you're going to transplant an economic model into a model which doesn't work. I mean here, we tried capitalism and we don't have a capitalistic base. Particularly like Uganda, what you have is a bureaucratic capitalistic class. It is capitalistic in as much as it has access and leverage to state resources. Minus that, there's actually not much. Then we tried running with the Marxist socialist model, which was really based on the analysis of classes. That also failed in Africa because you could no longer chant around things of land to the tiller, because actually the land was with the tiller and the peasant was very poor. And we are now being told peasantry is a very archaic and undeveloped system. I think for me, what should be able to work is for the economists we have to devise the best model that works for us. It could be a bit of each and everything, because we are told you don't need to reinvent the wheel. These are already time-tested methods. But again, each time you hear those who are ahead of us saying so, it's because they want us to think the way they are thinking. I don't believe context doesn't matter, that everything is just a matter of doing it right. So what we need to do is to rethink, what do we need as Africa? What does our society need? What does our society look like? What are our internal contradictions? How much do we get of the West? How much do we get of the East? How much do we get of our own selves? And then have an economic model that works for us.
Captain Francis Babu, you made a comment when we came in, but we shall not talk about that comment. Let's get straight to the discussion.
Yes.
President Kagame will be president of Rwanda,
yes,
especially looking at how the results have turned out. But also we know there has been finger pointing between DRC and Rwanda. And what does this mean for the region?
No, these are just indicators of the weaknesses of African leadership. Weaknesses in understanding statecraft. Now, we are talking about countries that were formed by the Europeans. These are not formed by Africans. Uganda, for example, was formed by the British, And if you look at its dynamics at the time of formation, you'll be very surprised. Starting from Naivasha up to Busia now, getting Kigezi as a president of the Queen, getting West Nile as a president of the Queen, and therefore Uganda as it is today. The people in there were never part of the whole thing. In fact, in 1894, when they signed the protectorate agreement with it was with Buganda, not with Uganda. And then they included Ankole, they included Toro eventually after some years. In fact, Bunyoro never came on board until 1932. All I am trying to tell you is that what you are seeing now happening, and I would like to congratulate Rwanda. From the time they had these problems, they have worked very hard to try and make their country become a strong nation. And they can, because Singapore, which is smaller than Rwanda, is a very strong nation. What they have tried to do is, first of all, to protect themselves. And then the other side, what they have been trying to do is that one of the things that the Germans and the Belgians did was to divide the people who lived there. You see, the Rwandese lived in that area. There was Burundi, Rwanda, Eastern Zaire, and part of it in Uganda, which is Kigezi now. And eventually, some of the people who moved in our cattle corridor. If you want to sit down and look at this very carefully, you'll find that our leaders really are wasting a lot of time on issues that are not helping the whole of Africa. Like my sister said, they're leaving the door open for the thieves to come in and steal.
And then you blame the thieves.
And then you blame, you know, I don't know, you blame all sorts of people. Because you have failed to lock the door of your nation. So, what you are seeing in Rwanda and Congo is basically a very simple issue of failing to sit down and sorting out a simple problem. That problem can be sorted out in a day. If Rwanda and Congo can sit down and say, what is your take? What is mine? What can we do to overcome all these problems? There are those, of course, who have got this dream that we want to take the whole of this area because we belong to a certain group of people. That will never work. What you need now is that maturity of leaders in this whole region to sit down and find a solution to that problem. Rwanda claiming that the people who left Rwanda are being used by Congo to infiltrate in their country. Congo is saying, no, Rwanda is pretending they want to take over Kivu and take over all the minerals in that area. These are accusations. They are bound to be there. The question is, can we sit down and find a solution? And I think that is where the leaders of Africa are failing. They are supposed to find a solution to that problem. The problem is not only fighting. Because every time there's a fight, they bring the troops from the other side, they fight, they beat the M23, the M23 is reformed again. This is not going to help us. What we need are genuine, honest Africans to turn this thing around and live and give and take and find a win-win situation. No one person is going to win in that issue. So your question comes back to our point. And I repeat this again. These countries were never formed by the people in those countries. They were formed by the Europeans. And when I heard some of those foreigners saying that Rwanda is stealing minerals from those countries, the people from those countries talking are stealing more minerals from those countries than the Rwandese are doing, if they are doing so.
How do we stop lamenting about the West forming these countries and take ownership of our region?
No, you cannot stop lamenting when they are landing aeroplanes in forests to take them the minerals.
There's no dispute to that, Honorable.
Yes.
But how do we own our own? Because finger pointing, lamenting is not going to take us.
No, I'm not finger pointing. I'm trying to say we must find a solution. And let me put it this way. The African leaders have to have a mindset change in solving this problem. And these Africans can solve that problem. They have solved bigger problems than that. And don't be told that they know how it can be solved.
Okay.
But they have got interests, and those interests must go away. You need to have a very clear-minded people to see. I mean, she's been in that group, by the way. We've got somebody who's next to me, who has been in
Which group?
the lake, the Great Lake. So, as far as I'm concerned, we have Africans, and I do not want to accept that we can't solve that problem.
Okay. Allow me bring in Dr. Sarah. Dr. Sarah, I will start from where he has left off. They have interests. Where does this leave the state of security of the region? President Kagame is president-elect as we speak now. Reports have come out from UN making allegations against Rwanda, making allegations as 4,000 soldiers of the RDF being there, photos shown, DRC ready to take them on, President Kagame making comments as I can attack DRC. Where does this leave the state of security of this whole region?
No, first, Timothy, I want to underscore the fact that statecraft, regional, international, bilateral interests are about interests. Bilateral relations are about interests. Regional, international relations, statecraft is about interests. So it's not a crime for a country
to have
or
interests.
countries to have interests. That's what drives statecraft. What we can condemn is, illegal exploitation, stealing, but also we need to be inward looking. During the break, I shared with the captain, and then he shared on air. If you leave your house open, as much as stealing is immoral, illegal, and wrong, but you sleep with your house open, it doesn't even need breaking in. And in the morning you wake up and some items are missing. Don't you have responsibility also to lock your house? So when we come to the situation of DRC and absence of government in the eastern DRC, where helicopters are landing, don't we have a responsibility to call out to DRC, to take charge of its territory? Why is it that DRC cannot form an effective government? I know that people can be there disrupting you and stopping you to stop. But you as internal citizens, as people who lead DRC, as President Felix Tshisekedi today, he has a responsibility to take control of his territory. And failure to take control of your territory, then you invite people. It's like planting maize on the roadside. So are you going to blame the birds?
No, it's grapes.
Grapes, maize, whatever. Are you going to blame the birds for poking on your grapes or whatever it is? So we need, first of all, call out DRC and the regional, neighbors. I know there are several processes that have failed really to materialize into something tangible. DRC has both internal contradictions that they've failed to resolve and external aggression, illegal exploitation forces due to their weaknesses. If you have 133 militias in eastern DRC, and each militia, other than M23, other militias are not interested in power. They are just trading in minerals in the region they control. So you have somebody, you declare that now these square miles are mine, I don't see anybody, and all you need are arrows and shields. And then you have helicopters landing and you have a free market. And you are making so much money. You are not even interested in what's happening in Kinshasa. You have got to blame the government of Kinshasa for one, failing national cohesion in the DRC, failing to recognize, because I don't see why. I know that our 1995 constitution the framers tried to recognize all tribes, including those that were previously contested, like Banyarwanda. They are in the third schedule of our constitution. Although now you hear again agitation that Rwanda are excluded, I don't understand, but my friend Honorable Mbida understands that better. But there was an attempt to include...
Excluded from where?
I don't know. There's that man. So...
This one.
Nobody has excluded anybody.
Yes.
No, they were excluded. They are not part.
Okay, but Rwanda in the third schedule of our constitution,
Now,
tribe number 26.
Yes,
So
but that's, I will
that's a
explain
different
that if
debate.
it is required,
Okay.
Because when
Yeah.
you bring it to the fore,
No,
it needs to be discussed.
Okay. So I was saying that there should be an attempt, because the first contradiction in the DRC is citizenship.
That is
And that's what is causing controversy. So there is a need to recognize people that belong to that country as citizens.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me come to Honorable Mbidde.
Yes.
Honorable, it's been 24 years of President Kagame. Another term has been added to him. What does his presidency, now that he's president-elect, mean for the East Africa and the global geopolitics?
Yeah. First of all, let me take this opportunity to congratulate him for having been elected with a landslide victory.
100%.
No, not at all. It is, I think, 99 point something.
0.1.
I can tell you, and I do not blame anybody for laughing out loud. It is even possible that he can get 100, or even having no competitors at all. And I can tell you why. Africa needs to develop a description between democracy and good governance. What actually is necessary for the African countries?
What's the difference?
In Africa, it is very unlikely that you can establish a government over the people through the quality of elections that are usually held, and you call it a democracy. I have often described this as a democradula here on this very show. Now, when you look at Rwanda, having one of the world's fastest growing economies, a country that for the last 30 years had been remembered majorly for genocide against the Tutsis, where genocide of the 1994 took place at a time when the whole world did not have an international criminal law instrument to try perpetrators until the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was established, that ultimately tried only 93 cases. Now, that small country established an organic homegrown court system that tried 1.2 million cases with the amount of money completely less than what was actually used by the ICTR. That country that recognizes the factors and combinations that are at play in that country established a constitution. That constitution, particularly when you look at Article 10, Article 10 gives directions, or what we would call directive principles of state policy, with extreme regard to power sharing. That is Article 10. What does it say? Article 62 of the same institution gives effect to power sharing that is enshrined under Article 10. What does it say? There are 3 organs of government all over the world. But the president and the speaker of parliament must never come from the same political party. Now that is one. So clearly, whoever goes to the poll wins an organ. Now that is different from what happens in Uganda. Despite the quality of elections, the winner actually wins all the organs of government, and the losers have no business in opinions of running state. Yes. So in Rwanda, whoever earns more than 50% of members of the House of Deputies, which we can call parliament here, does not earn 50% of the members of cabinet. Now that is power sharing at play. So if you laugh at the 1 percentage point obtained by the opposition, that 1 percentage point will form over 50% of cabinet. So somebody will jubilate for even losing an election in Rwanda, because clearly it interprets into winning leadership of parliament and majority at cabinet. And these are things that apply. And where you reach at such consensus establishment of administration, you find that it is even foolhardy for anybody to begin thinking of defeating a president who actually forms cabinet using the opposition, has got parliament led by the opposition. You cannot have walk to work after election is in Rwanda. And these are things that are not being communicated to anybody. I have studied this system, and I find a lot of genius.
So people
So
should
in my opinion,
are you saying that political contenders in Rwanda should settle for the second best and should not aspire for the number one?
they aspire for the number one, but they win even during the process of losing. And that is what we call a consensus. And that now establishes, because a people's level to govern themselves democratically is proportionate to the degree of their understanding of the structures and the functioning of the whole social body.
I think the most important thing about this is
yes.
what do we get out of that system?
Yes.
Let's look at it as a model.
The give and take.
That
Yeah.
is a model.
Let's look at it as a model. Does the people of that country benefit out of it?
Yes. So the leadership question was sorted by the Constitution. It is no longer something that people look forward to be sorted by an election. It was sorted, and that is good governance. To the extent then that now whoever shows up at cabinet level, you now find guidelines established for you that are the following.
Cabinet
Zero tolerance
has
to corruption.
Performance indicators.
They do.
Yeah.
Zero tolerance to corruption, and this begins with the head. I can safely tell you that I think these are things that we need to emulate. Now, when you talk
learn from, not emulate.
probably,
Yes.
all the syntactical
I like the
patterns-
word learn rather than emulate.
I am most obliged. So when you look at DRC, and Honorable Salah has, Dr. Salah has just mentioned something very interesting. The Congo DRC established a constitution in 1960, taking cognizant that there are people who are actually Kinyarwanda speaking in Congo, but in a dichotomy of two interpretations. One, those that were...
Honorable Mbide, they are actually citizens of Rwanda, but that portion was taken by Congo.
No, I am...
During the colonial time.
Captain, it is actually two. And that is what I call the dichotomy. There are two limbs of citizenship, of Kinyarwanda speaking people.
Yes.
The first limb are those that were the subject of boundary demarcations,
Correct.
whose pieces of land were carved out of the former Rwanda kingdom
Yes.
and given to Congo. Then the second dichotomy is those that were actually laborers that were agreed upon and granted to King Leopold Rivile to work as laborers
After he
in
had cut
plantations
off the hands of all the
in
Congolese,
1885. Yes. So they arrived in 1925, and when you calculate the age of whoever arrived, you find that the M23 are actually grandchildren. So they were all declared citizens of Congo by 1960 Constitution.
Yes.
The two types. Now those two also exist in Uganda. Those two types.
Yes.
Those whose pieces of land were carved out of former Rwanda kingdom And those who constitute the Mpororo, the
Chisoro.
Chisoro, part
No, the whole of Kigezi was given to us.
So now, but what is happening in Congo? Mobutu decided to begin and commencing amendments that would declare them non-citizens of Congo.
That was wrong.
And what happened in Uganda? Article 10, Dr. Sara, excludes those that came.
After 1926.
That become citizens, by the way, when Uganda was formed in 1962. They were declared by midnight of 8th of October 1962. Citizens of Uganda. But Article 10 provides a clause of the Constitution of Uganda now, 1995, that for you to be a member, to be a Ugandan citizen by birth, either of your parents or grandparents should have been a member of an indigenous ethnic group, ethnic community in Uganda by 1926. So that is now reference to boundary demarcations. So in Uganda, they excluded part of those that came and gave birth to children that became citizens. And only, so the Banyarwanda, Dr. Sara, that are referred to in the Constitution are only those, they are only those whose pieces of land were demarcated and carved out of Rwanda Kingdom. So you must point to burial grounds.
Midday, for the first time, I'll have to correct you.
There
is a study on this one.
Let me tell you.
No, there is a study on this one. Let's get it correct. There are people who were in the cattle corridor by 1926, and they are Ugandans.
Now, even when they were part of the cattle corridor by 1900, the word member does not refer to those who came. Member refers to those that are indigenous geographically by 1926.
Yes.
So membership does not refer to whoever came, even if you came in 1900, before 1926. So here, considerations that are given by Article 10 are only those that are a subject of intermarriage can be citizens. Now whoever has got a Munyarwanda father and a mother and are not owing their descent from those pieces of land of Mpororo, you are not citizens of Uganda by birth. So even here, this is a recipe for disaster in the future.
Thank you very much. Let me bring in Professor.
I don't agree with you.
Pardon?
You have dual citizenship.
Dual citizenship is not citizenship by birth.
Excuse me.
And the rights are different.
I know.
Yes, Captain Babu.
Please, let him be the not exaggerate this thing. It's a very clear thing. And there is a study by United Nations on this issue. The people of the whole of Kigezi are Ugandans by 1926.
Yes, that's what I said.
That's point number one. Point number two, anybody who was found in Uganda by 1926, regardless, is a Ugandan.
Yeah. Not at all.
And
so when you
this interpretation is being made, listen, is being made by certain people who want to look different. I want to assure you,
Babu,
according to this study,
respectfully,
let me finish this.
If you look at
let him finish. I'm going to come back to you.
The people in West Nile, the people in West Nile, those ones who came also with West Nile in 1903 and in 1905, and the people in the corridor by 1926 they were Ugandans.
Okay.
So what I would like to also tell the viewers is that when you look at the debates of the Constituent Assembly, you look at the debate of the late Adoko Nekioni vis-a-vis the debates that were established by the chairperson of the Legal and Drafting Committee at the time, you find that any reference to 1926 was a reference to boundary demarcation. Whoever is not a subject of demarcation, those that occupied that were in Uganda for purposes of labor, they started in 1930 up to, and those that were actually the subject of running away, or the subject, but not registered refugees, and you are not children of former ambassadors, they all lost citizenship And that is what we are trying to think, we are working on.
No, you can go and vote.
So
these guys can go and vote at the Rwandese embassy. They don't have to give reasons.
Not at all. Not
so
at all.
As far as I'm concerned,
and of course,
but they should not.
Let him finish.
I was in the CA.
Yes, and that is why I know.
I was in the CA, and I'm insisting he's giving the wrong thing.
You know, they say that an old woman is always uneasy when a bone is mentioned. Because you see, by necessary implication, old exhibits bones. So when you talk about one, an old woman begins to think probably you are mentioning one that you have seen. Honorable Babu, there is
I disagree with you on this one. I've been hearing you saying it on different media is wrong.
And
it's wrong.
Let him finish so that I can come
to No, it's wrong.
Yes, but and you see,
a complete study was done.
I am also citing studies. And I can tell you,
Honorable, so that I bring Professor.
You see, that is your interpretation. It is not
at all.
It's not correct.
This is guided by a lot of professional competence in the legal profession, and particularly by those that have written about the same.
No.
Honorable Babu, this is a matter for which people have been denied. Nobody
has been denied anything.
Okay,
you see, you can imagine. So I can tell you that when you go to the Minister of Internal Affairs, I do not want to take you very far. They will tell you the reason for which a lot of people are denied documentation in terms of passports. When you go to NIRA,
although their reasons are different.
Not at all.
Gentlemen, I'm going to ask that.
You know what is disturbing?
Captain Babu, let's spark this conversation.
When people make mistakes, they try to misinterpret everything.
We'll pick up this conversation another day. Please allow me to bring in Professor. Professor, moving forward, with all these global pressures, we're seeing ECOWAS having 3 countries leave and begin an alliance of their own. East Africa as a bloc. Pressures, seeing that the new boy of the US is President Ruto, seeing the pressures of the East. How do we de-escalate the tensions that are coming towards East Africa as a bloc from the globe?
Yeah, thank you very much, Timothy. I think it depends on what you want to de-escalate. If simply there's interest which is mutual, which is economic, externally coming to East Africa or to any African regional bloc, I don't think there's a problem with that, because no country is an island. Countries exist on trade partnerships, economic partnerships, and political partnerships, some of which are, we've not even talked about the defense partnerships. So I think collaboration is key. What matters is how mutually respectful are those kinds of collaborations. Of course, people talk about mutuality when amongst equals. When one thinks is a bully boy or is superior and another one is inferior, is always begging, there can never be equality in the partnership, and there cannot be mutual respect, because one sees you as a beggar and then they want to follow up and see what have you done with the monies you begged from us. So where the relationship is about curtailing the development of these countries, where the relationship is in such a way that it is restricting the state from doing something for the people that it presides over, we should be worried, because it is a matter of time and people will revolt. You're seeing Gen Zs in Kenya and you've not even seen the worst of it, okay? So you don't know how other countries will explode. So it will be a different thing. So these partnerships should be driven at development for the people, which means we have to rethink the economic models in which the partnerships are being framed. So that is a problem. But I also wanted to touch a bit on nation states. Of course, we have been told that the problem is how we were put together. But I must say we are not the first countries to be put together with the different groupings. You have other countries bring people together through conquest and through brutal wars. So you have a part belonging to a country knowing we were brought in forcefully, our cultures were destroyed and everything. You have other places where people were put together through colonial forces. The US itself was put together by bringing 13 different British colonies together. It is now 248 years. It is not yet the best. It is still crafting what it means to be an American. and an American citizen. We know that whole period of 248 years, they have had issues where some belonged, some did not belong, some were enslaved. It is until the 1960s that when blacks started and started being considered as people. Then you are talking about the Hispanics and others. So I think we should not be discouraged. Our countries are not even 100 years old. The issue for me is how do we forge a national identity out of the crafting that occurred? We must also learn, first of all, there are few countries in the world where you have nation states, where you just have one tribe and that tribe is also the basis of political organizing.
Somalia.
There are very few countries like that. Because even when you go to Somalia, you'll find their differences.
But
if people don't if people don't differentiate them, you know, human beings will always find a way of differentiating themselves.
Yeah.
If they don't differentiate by tribe, they will differentiate by clan, they will differentiate by age, by caste, by class, by so many things. When you go to the UK, you know about the English, then there are the Scots, then there are the Welsh, then
the Geordies from Newcastle.
You have that. You go to France and all these countries. So a national identity is an intentional project which has to be crafted on a daily. Through things like the Constitution, through the singing of the anthem, through whoever hangs on the walls, and it is. We cannot leave it to whom it may concern and then expect these countries to think as one. People will still go to the US and celebrate as Gwanga Muje. They will still celebrate as Banyachigezi, even when they're in the US. Because there has not been a process back home of crafting a Ugandan national identity or an East African national identity.
So I'm going to give each of you parting shots of 2 minutes. I'll start with the Honorable Babu. I'll get to Dr. Sarah, Honorable Mbide, and finally, Professor. Over to you, Honorable Babu.
Thank you very much. It's been a very pleasant conversation. Very quickly, the East African Federation, we've been chasing it since 1952. A man called Cohen, who was our governor, who brought the Legislative Council, wanted us to have an East African Federation. It never occurred. We went in 1960s, we came out with something called the Commission, East African Commission, then we came out with East African Common Service Organization, where we were doing, we were having common services, like railways, airlines, and so on and so forth. And until today, two things in Africa happened. A man called Nkrumah wanted the whole of Africa to have a Pan-African nation, one nation. A man called Dubois, I think in 1924, wanted to have United States of Africa. The people in East Africa, especially Nyerere, said, no, let us start with a small block, East Africa. Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania never occurred. We failed. And that has been continuous. So after some time in 1986, we dismantled it and we started it again in 1993. So we came with something called the East African Community now. And I'm happy that Honorable Mbide was one of our members there in their Legislative Council. Unfortunately, I think we should have listened to Mzee Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, who said, let us remain small, consolidate it, then add on. What I'm seeing now, we've taken the East African Community and we're adding on more countries, and we're not getting, to me, the federation is going further and further. We're not getting there. So
actually now they are beginning to confederate instead.
That's right. They have now come out with something called confederation. Confederation means you remain with the power, you forget about federation. Yeah. So I want to end by saying, I pray to God that our leaders could calm down. And if they really want this thing called federation, and they want Pan-Africanism, Pan-Africanism, initially you said, let's start with a small thing, consolidate. Let us consolidate East Africa. Let's get to like each other. Let us make Africa, let's make Africa important.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dr. Sarah?
Well, I think we need to respect one major fundamental aspect, that sovereignty of nations is about three things: the people, the laws, and territorial integrity. Once we consolidate these three elements, because you cannot integrate weaker states, you cannot integrate chaos, you cannot confederate conflict, and you think you're making progress. Let's first consolidate national unity, nationalism, citizenship, and then integrate strong states with the respect of the people, territory, and laws of each country. That's when East African community shall succeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Honorable Mbide.
Yes, the problem is that the desire for markets cannot wait. So we must, in any case,
that's a good one.
In any case, we must continue.
It's moving faster than the federation.
And for us to protect the interests of transaction, we must definitely keep within the East African community the way it is, in order for such transactions to enjoy tribunals like the East African Court of Justice for settlement of disputes. Number two, all is not lost. For me, I was happy with the interministerial retreat in Zanzibar, which was concomitant to the one in Addis, for purposes that the resolutions, I think, gave effect to solutions of the problems that we are facing within the East African Community region. When they reinforced the matter that material to do with DRC, I think have to be concluded by, one, illuminating the Kenya-led process that seeks to politically have solutions to the problem between M23 and Congo DRC, and also, of course, insisting that all borders for the East African Community region should be opened. The one between Burundi and Rwanda will be the subject of course, the October meeting, and all ministers really, I think, agreed to a possibility of settlement of that. And in my opinion, for me, I was happy. Then the East African Community region that seeks to become one country needs also now to adopt the jus soli principle of citizenship, that you are a citizen by birth where you were born.
Okay.
Yes.
So that if we want to be one country, our one country should not have stateless persons within it who are born in that country with evidence of a birth certificate. So in my opinion, I think the East African community, like my colleagues have said, needs to sail through. It is not possible for you to say the end justifies the means, but the means should be pure in order to reach the end safely.
Thank you very much. Lastly, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. As we discussed the DRC, it is not very far to know that actually it's a failed state and that there are reasons why it has failed. But also, as we look at Kenya, we wonder and worry that it will not lead to state failure. And of course, failed states are not good for economic growth. They are not good for economic development, and they lead to issues such as corruption and unequal development and more worse things. And what are some of the causes of a failed state? Of course, you have things like civil war, ethnic violence or genocide, predatory governments, and bureaucratic behavior. So we need to pay attention to these things to avoid states failing. You saw how the grandiose of the late President Mobutu Sese Seko led to the door being wide open. Yes. So many people entered, and you have the problem of state failure in Eastern DRC is really because there are so many actors there who came under the guise of peacekeeping and have failed to leave. So now everyone does what they want to do. So we also need to guard our states against these triggers of state failure. So since now everyone is looking at bureaucratic behavior and they are looking at predatory governments, I think those two organs need to, particularly government, because the one which is being perceived as bureaucratic and also predatory, it needs to put its act together. Because when people vote every 5 years, the social contract is that actually the state is going to care and people are going to obey through their taxes and through obeying laws. So when something doesn't rhyme well and the bureaucrats are living large with people who are begging to survive, it becomes a challenge. So I think my parting shot is, let us not take what is happening in Kenya lightly. State failure is very possible because the DRS is there to show us that actually you can actually fail as a state, and let us guard our states against these behaviors. Let's take criticisms very objectively and work at it. When we failed before 1986, there was not much development here.
You know, the young people say that when you are taxing us, you are giving us examples of Singapore. But when we ask for roads, you give us examples of DRC.
So basically that's it. Thank
Let me
you.
give some feedback here. Apollo to Mugaya has a few comments here. He says, thank you, Timothy, for the show. The demonstrations in Kenya are as a result of economic hikes, the finance bill, but also the grassroots movement of young people. He talks about economic wars, political reforms, corruption, police brutality, government accountability. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Timothy, for the show. East Africa states can sit and ignore what is happening in Nairobi because the effects are not directly affecting the rest of them. Secondly, we need to be cognizant of the fact that sometimes violence can be contagious. Ronald Mivule. Thank you very much. What I learned from the Kenyan is before the laws are passed and the bills are implemented, there should be a referendum so that such laws compel the public opinion. This is Sembusi from Kalewe. Okay?
Impossible.
Thank you, ladies and
Returning
gentlemen.
Parliament to the owner.
The big office bearers in East Africa have forgotten and are busy enjoying themselves, not knowing that the deeds and the braggant lives being mirrored to outside environment comprised of the youth who are unemployed. This creates a very big gap between the new generation and the wazeis. They can never be bridged. What even in Uganda is here is exploding. Okay, let me leave that. Welcome. Thank you for the comments on President Ruto. You must also give him credit for not shutting down the internet. The first instinct. Okay, finally, this is Bwango Robert from Fort Portal City. To me, I wish His Excellency Ruto could have consulted the old people of the country for the dialogue so as the youth can go off the streets, because the cost of damage that is happening is directly affecting the economy, hence halting the foreign businesses taking place. Tourism sector is affected, import and export is affected, and Kenya needs dialogue. Otherwise, unnecessary demonstrations could result into deaths on the street. All those have already happened. A lot of feedback. Thank you very much. I want to thank the production team, Margaret, Pedita, and my producer, Patrick, for making sure today happens. Professor, thank you. Honorable Bide, thank you. Dr. Sarah, thank you. Honorable Francis, thank you very much. From us to you, we'll end it this way. Well done is better than well said by Benjamin Franklin. Good morning.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.